It was Sunday, October 14th, 2012, in Lakewood, Dallas. A calm autumn evening when porch lights glowed over quiet streets. 18-year-old Lydia Monroe left home to return a Redbox DVD before heading to her youth class at church. She promised her mom she'd be back before dark. But Lydia never came home. Her white minivan was later found tipped in a shallow creek, her phone and purse still inside, untouched, waiting, as if she had simply vanished into the night. Detectives found a single knife beneath the passenger seat, wiped clean except for one faint trace of blood. And on surveillance footage from Walgreens, a blurred figure in a dark baseball cap standing just inches from her door. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned into 7 long years of silence. Until one microscopic piece of DNA, invisible to the naked eye, finally revealed a name that changed everything. What really happened that evening in Lakewood? Who was the man beside Lydia's car? And why did it take nearly a decade to uncover the truth? You're watching Unsolved Secret Stories, where forgotten stories find their voices again. Hit subscribe, tap the notification bell, and join us as we reopen the case of Lydia Monroe, because some stories refuse to stay buried. It was Sunday, October 14th, 2012. In Lakewood, a Dallas neighborhood where the houses were trimmed with porch lights and the streets were lined with dogwood trees, the air that evening carried the first hint of autumn. By 5:30, the sun was melting into a muted orange behind rows of quiet houses. Families prepared dinner. Children finished their homework. To most, it was just another ordinary Sunday. For Lydia Monroe, 18, this day marked a small, personal routine. She had just graduated high school, a solid student, modest, and known for her gentle humor at Trinity Baptist Church. Her room was neat, the kind of place that held the traces of a childhood not yet fully left behind. A faded teddy bear sat propped on her pillow. An acceptance letter from community college was pinned above her desk. On her bedside table, a delicate silver bracelet engraved with the initials LM. Before she left, Lydia slipped that bracelet on her wrist, a habit since her birthday. She checked her phone. No new texts. She called out to her mother, Karen, standing by the stove. "I'll be back before dark," Lydia promised, voice steady, eyes shining with the mix of innocence and determination only youth can have. Karen smiled, brushing her daughter's cheek with a mother's silent blessing. Lydia's white minivan was parked by the curb. She started the engine, the sound echoing quietly against the brickwork of her home. Her destination, a youth ministry class at church, an event she never missed. But first, a short stop. The Redbox machine at Walgreens on Mockingbird Lane. She had to return a DVD, a romantic comedy borrowed days earlier. The Walgreens parking lot was half empty. Neon lights hummed above the glass doors. Lydia pulled up beside the Redbox kiosk, the minivan's engine idling as she fished the DVD from her bag. She hesitated, scrolling quickly through her phone, maybe a last look at her messages, or a quick photo for her Instagram story. The little moments that meant nothing until they became everything. Inside the store, a cashier remembered her. Always polite, always in a hurry. But outside, another witness saw something different. A tall man, his skin dark beneath a shadowed baseball cap, leaned against Lydia's minivan. He stood close, one hand resting casually but firmly on her car door, the other shoved deep in his jacket pocket. From a distance, nothing seemed amiss. Up close, there was tension in the way his body blocked the door, The way Lydia's face shifted from politeness to unease. The exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. No one heard what was said. The security cameras above the lot flickered, catching only the blurry outline of the man and the faint shimmer of Lydia's silver bracelet as she tried to step away. At 5:50 p.m., Lydia's van pulled out of the lot, turning left toward the church. Traffic was light. The taillights faded into the early dusk, swallowed by the stillness of a Sunday evening. That was the last time anyone would see her alive. Minutes passed, then hours. At Trinity Baptist, friends waited for Lydia, her absence at first an oddity, then a worry. By nightfall, the sun had vanished, replaced by a pale half-moon and the drone of distant sirens. Lydia's phone rang, then rang again, each call a silent question hanging in the air. Her mother paced by the window, every passing car in the street filling her with hope, then dread. By 10 o'clock, Karen Monroe knew something was wrong. She called Lydia's friends, then the church, then the police. Desperation guided her trembling hands as she opened the Find My iPhone app, a lifeline for parents and their children in this digital age. A single blue dot blinked at her from the map, far from the church, not moving. It was in a stretch of empty road near Dixon Branch Creek, a place Lydia had no reason to be. Police arrived quickly, sweeping the area with flashlights, radios crackling in the dark. Karen sat on the curb, clutching her phone, staring at that blue dot. The night air grew colder, the world shrinking down to the pale glow of cell phones and the sound of searchers' boots in the grass. By midnight, all they had was a minivan-shaped shadow on a grainy parking lot tape, a last sighting at a Walgreens, and 1,000 unspoken fears. The ordinary fabric of the Monroes' life had been torn in a single silent evening. In the days to come, news would spread, first through hushed whispers at church, then headlines in the Dallas paper. Local teen disappears on way to church. Neighbors would leave casseroles on the Monroes' porch. Pastors would gather to pray. And strangers would wonder how something like this could happen in their town. But on that first night, all that existed was the unanswered phone, the empty van, and the long, cold silence that would haunt everyone who loved Lydia Monroe. By dawn, the world had shifted for Karen Monroe. The house was too quiet, her daughter's bed still untouched from the night before. Every corner of Lydia's room felt haunted, her backpack slumped by the desk, her sneakers lined up by the door. Downstairs, Karen's hands shook as she dialed the police again, voice brittle, repeating the same questions. Had there been any word? Had anyone seen her car? Had anything changed? A mile away, near Dixon Branch Creek, police cruisers lined the side of the deserted road, their lights flickering against the undergrowth. The air was sharp and damp, the ground soft beneath boots. In the pale morning light, officers combed the brush and followed the faint beep from Karen's phone. Her daughter's location, frozen in place as if Lydia herself was somewhere nearby, calling out silently. And then they saw it. Lydia's white minivan, lying on its side in the shallow water, its reflection quivering in the sluggish current. The driver's door was open, hanging loosely, the edge splattered with mud. A detective, older and tired, knelt at the edge of the water and peered inside, his breath clouding in the morning chill. Inside the van, time seemed suspended. Lydia's purse sat neatly on the passenger seat, a wallet peeking out, her cell phone beside it. On the floor, her shoes, white canvas, the laces undone. The air inside the car was heavy with silence, as if the last moments had left a residue too dense to clear. There were no signs of a struggle, nothing broken or torn. Only a few faint bloodstains marked the driver's seat, dried now to a rusty smear. Beneath the passenger side, hidden by a mat, a knife rested, its blade stained with dried blood, its handle worn smooth by use. An officer lifted it carefully, glancing back at the others, the gesture loaded with unspoken meaning. Someone had placed it there, methodically, almost as if leaving behind a calling card. Around the van, the ground was trampled, mud pressed flat by hurried steps. But there were no footprints leading away. Nothing to show where Lydia, or whoever had been with her, had gone. No wallet or phone missing, no cash stolen, nothing taken but Lydia herself. It was as if she had vanished into the early morning fog, leaving behind only the mystery of how and why. As news spread, the scene around Dixon Branch Creek transformed. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, police radios buzzed with updates, and cameras from local stations lined the perimeter, their operators whispering Lydia's name like it was a fragile secret. Reporters recited what little they knew. A missing girl, a church-bound Sunday, a van found abandoned in the creek. Back at home, Karen waited for answers, every minute a fresh torment. Detectives came and went, shoes leaving muddy prints in the Monroe foyer. They asked the same questions in different ways. Did Lydia have enemies? Had she seemed upset? Had anyone unusual contacted her recently? Karen answered them all, her voice growing hoarse, her eyes hollow from sleeplessness. The investigation moved quickly at first, driven by the urgency of those early hours. Police canvassed the area, knocked on doors, scoured surveillance tapes from Walgreens and nearby gas stations. They found the brief, grainy image of Lydia's van pulling out of the lot, taillights flickering in the dusk. They traced her likely route, measured the distance from the church, mapped the empty space where her phone had last signaled. But the evidence inside the van only deepened the mystery. Lydia's belongings were untouched, her phone battery dead but undamaged. Her purse contained everything: a student ID, a packet of gum, a few crumpled receipts. There was no sign of a violent struggle, no evidence of robbery, no footprints, no fingerprints that matched any known suspect. Just the silent imprint of fear lingering in the air, and the knife, mute and unyielding. By the second day, the search expanded into the creek and its banks. Divers moved through cold, murky water, eyes stinging, hands numb. Dogs combed the brush, their handlers calling out Lydia's name, the syllables drifting away over the water. Searchers found nothing but silence, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. For the Monroe family, time fractured. Every hour without news became a wound. Karen sat on the porch, hands locked in her lap, her gaze fixed on the end of the street, waiting for Lydia's return. Neighbors brought casseroles and prayers, but there was little comfort in ritual. The church community gathered nightly, lighting candles, clinging to hope that somehow Lydia would walk back through her front door, her smile unchanged. But the van remained in the impound lot, silent and damning. Police processed the evidence, cataloged every item, sent the knife to the lab. The case file thickened with statements, photographs, maps, a record of confusion more than clarity. Beneath everything, one question grew louder, refusing to be silenced. Where was Lydia? And what had really happened on that ordinary Sunday, when a young woman disappeared without a sound? In the days after Lydia Monroe's disappearance, hope and fear battled beneath the surface of every conversation in Lakewood. Flyers with Lydia's picture fluttered on lampposts and telephone poles, her shy smile gazing out at a world suddenly full of suspicion. The church congregation organized search parties. Local businesses taped her photo to windows and offered to help in any way they could. For the police, the search for Lydia became an urgent race against time. But the investigation itself moved slowly, weighed down by the absence of hard evidence. Detectives interviewed everyone who had been at the Walgreens that Sunday. Security footage, scrubbed and analyzed frame by frame, revealed little. The van, the red box machine, people moving in and out of the store. Only one thing stood out: a tall figure in a dark baseball cap, lingering near Lydia's minivan. The image was blurry, the details lost in shadow and static. He was there for less than 2 minutes. His hand touched the door, his posture close but unreadable. The camera caught only an outline, the hat pulled low over his eyes. Donald Reeves, a retired mechanic and a regular at the Walgreens, remembered the moment. He described the man as tall, dark-skinned, wearing a black hoodie. Reeves saw Lydia speaking to him, noticed her body stiffen slightly, as if she was caught between politeness and unease. Reeves watched as the man leaned against the van, his presence imposing. Then Lydia pulled away, the van leaving the lot. Reeves could not recall the man's face. Memory, always unreliable, offered only fragments: a gesture, a stance, a silhouette. The police followed this thin thread. They combed through criminal records in the area, looking for men matching the witness's description. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood around Walgreens, knocking on doors, stopping anyone who seemed out of place. They questioned homeless men who drifted through the area, scanned parking lot footage from previous weeks. No matches, nothing solid. Days stretched into weeks. Other details emerged, small, uncertain, each hinting at a pattern. A woman who volunteered at Lydia's church remembered a man approaching the parking lot a few days before the disappearance, asking for directions in a tone that was a little too insistent. At the time, no one thought much of it. Now that fleeting moment returned with sharp clarity. A stranger, out of place, eyes scanning faces, car doors, movements. Despite their efforts, the police hit wall after wall. The blurred security footage revealed nothing more. Lydia's van yielded no fingerprints except her own. The knife found under the seat was clean of any prints as well, wiped down or perhaps always handled with care. No witness could describe the man in the hat beyond the vaguest impressions. Tall, dark, wearing black. It was not enough for a composite sketch, not enough for an arrest. Still, suspicion lingered. The detective assigned to the case kept a file marked with Lydia's initials on his desk, pages growing with each passing day. A whiteboard in the precinct filled up with timelines and names, photographs of the Walgreens lot at dusk, maps tracing Lydia's last known movements. The sense of something missed, something crucial but invisible, hung in the air like static. The neighborhood changed, subtly but unmistakably. Parents walked their children to school, eyes watchful. Women clutched their keys tighter in parking lots. People looked twice at strangers, at men in hats, at anyone whose presence felt the least bit out of rhythm. Fear became a constant undercurrent, an invisible wound that would not heal. For Lydia's family, suspicion was a shadow they could neither see nor fight. Karen replayed every conversation with her daughter, searching for a sign she had missed. She wondered about the days leading up to Lydia's disappearance, about the stranger at church, about the way Lydia's voice had sounded the last time she called. And so, as the weeks slipped by, the mystery hardened. The man in the hat became an absence that haunted every possibility. No one knew his name, or where he had come from, or where he had gone. All that remained was a blurred outline in a parking lot, a van left in a creek, and a family waiting for answers that refused to come. The weeks following Lydia Monroe's disappearance slowly congealed into months. Fall gave way to a gray Dallas winter. The first round of news reports faded from the television. At Trinity Baptist, prayers for Lydia turned into prayers for the Monroe family, as if she had already become a memory, a name to be whispered gently in hallways and at potlucks. By Christmas, her case was folded into the back rooms of the Dallas Police Department, assigned a cold case number, 457B, and stacked with other missing girls, other unsolved endings. For the Monroe family, time did not heal. Time sharpened. Karen Monroe could not let go. She had once been a pediatric nurse, the kind of woman who always had an answer, who could mend a wound or calm a child with her voice. But now her hands trembled in the quiet. She stopped going to the hospital. The walls of her home pressed in around her, thick with reminders. Lydia's jacket still on its hook, her perfume lingering in the bathroom, her graduation tassel hanging from the rearview mirror of her car. The search for Lydia never truly stopped, not for Karen. She joined online forums for families of the missing, learning to speak in the language of cold case files and DNA kits. She collected articles about other young women who vanished, who were found, sometimes too late. Each story became a part of her own. She mapped them on her wall, red pushpins for each lost girl. She wondered if their mothers also woke at 3 a.m., hearts pounding, listening for footsteps that would never come. Each year on Lydia's birthday, Karen organized a vigil in the Walgreens parking lot where her daughter was last seen. She brought folding chairs and candles, stood beneath the red box machine with friends and strangers, some who remembered Lydia, others who simply wanted to show support. They held up signs. Justice for Lydia. Her father, Mark, always at her side, stoic but shattered, gave the same short speech. How Lydia loved the community, how she deserved more than to be forgotten. Their youngest, Emma, clung to her mother's coat, asking questions no one could answer. The first year, the local news covered the vigil. The second year, the coverage was a brief mention on the evening news. By the third, it was only the Monroes and a handful of loyal friends. The world had moved on. Neighbors stopped asking about Lydia, afraid of reopening a wound that seemed to never heal. In the grocery store, people would look away, unsure what to say. The Monroes became a family shaped by absence, walking through life in a state of half-mourning. Karen felt the pressure of time on her chest. She needed purpose, something to quiet the endless replay of the last day. Lydia's promise to be home before dark, her gentle smile, the way she wore her silver bracelet, as if it would protect her from the world. Karen quit nursing and enrolled in counseling classes. She began working at a center for assault survivors, listening to other women's stories, sharing her own pain in careful, measured pieces. "I couldn't save my own daughter," she once told a colleague, "but maybe I can save someone else." Her voice was quiet, shaped by years of loss, yet determined not to let her daughter's story become only an entry in a forgotten file. Meanwhile, the Dallas Police Department moved on to newer emergencies. Lydia's case remained unsolved, its file thickening with dust and old reports. The detective who had once led the search was reassigned. The witness statements, crime scene photos, and forensic reports were boxed and shelved with dozens of others in a dim back office. The evidence, Lydia's phone, the knife from the van, the blood-stained seat, were preserved but no longer urgent. Occasionally, a new detective would glance at the file, perhaps trying to piece together the scattered clues, the blurry figure in the Walgreens lot, the untouched purse and wallet, the knife wiped clean except for a faded trace of blood. But nothing led anywhere new. Leads faded. The man in the hat vanished from the rumor mill. Stories of strangers approaching women in church parking lots blurred into urban legend. In the neighborhood, the memory of Lydia became something people discussed in low voices, if at all. It was so sad. What happened to that girl? People would say, already moving on to the next topic. It became safer not to remember. The years slipped by. The world changed. Lydia's friends went to college, graduated, got jobs. Some married, moved away. Emma, her little sister, grew into a teenager, shaped by the shadow of an older sibling she could never quite know. The Monroes kept Lydia's room exactly as she left it, as if she might still return and slip beneath her covers, apologizing for worrying everyone. And yet, every so often, a small glimmer of hope would flicker to life. A rumor of a similar case in another city, a report of a missing person found after years. Karen would call the detective, who would check the file, offer gentle words, and close it again. With each call, the space between hope and reality grew colder. But every year, on the anniversary, Karen stood beneath the red box in the Walgreens parking lot and lit a candle. She watched the flames dance against the Texas night and whispered her daughter's name, promising she would never let Lydia become just a file number, never let her memory drift away into silence. In this way, the story of Lydia Monroe refused to end, even as the world seemed determined to forget. By the winter of 2019, nearly 7 years after Lydia Monroe vanished, the case of Cold File 457B had faded into the deep stacks of the Dallas Police Archives. Most detectives who remembered her file had retired or transferred, the photographs and interview transcripts yellowing at the edges, the evidence sealed in boxes, rarely disturbed. Lydia's story had become a quiet ache for her family, but little more than a whisper among law enforcement, until science itself decided not to forget. The Dallas Forensic Lab had recently adopted a new technology, untouched DNA analysis. Where old tests needed visible blood or hair, untouched DNA could pull a genetic profile from just a few microscopic skin cells left behind on metal or fabric. The process was slow, expensive, and far from infallible. But it was hope, however thin, in a case where hope was mostly memory. It started with a young technician working overtime on cold cases who lifted the knife from its evidence bag. The blade had always been a puzzle, wiped mostly clean, the blood-stained faint, old, nearly erased by time and water. Under a new microscope, the technician swabbed the handle and the blade, focusing on grooves where a hand might have slipped. Days passed while the samples were processed, amplified, and compared against state and national databases. No one expected much. In cold case work, disappointment was the rule. But science, indifferent to expectation, returned a result. On a late Friday afternoon, the lab director's screen flashed a hit. Harold Cochran, age 37. He had a record arrested in Texarkana in 2009 for sexual assault, released for lack of evidence. He'd drifted between cities, living on the margins, never staying anywhere long. There were whispers about him in Garland, rumors of trouble in South Dallas, but nothing ever proven. The database match was direct. The DNA on the knife handle, cells invisible to the naked eye, belonged to him. For the first time in years, Lydia's file was pulled from storage. Detectives pored over old notes and maps, scouring for any connection to Cochran. They traced his path through the years, discovering patterns in his movements. 2 cases, once considered isolated, now shimmered with familiarity. An attack in Garland in 2010, a missing woman in Texarkana in 2009. Both near water, both involving abandoned vehicles, both cold files. The details matched not by coincidence, but by method. Approach, control, move the victim, stage a fake accident, leave a silent scene. With DNA in hand, the case was officially reopened. This time, the police had a name, one that the science could not refute. They built a timeline of Cochran's life, tracking down former neighbors and old co-workers. Interviews revealed a man who seemed invisible, always on the edge of suspicion, but never close enough for an arrest. He worked odd jobs, lived in rundown apartments, stayed just long enough to learn the habits of those around him. Women recalled feeling watched. One remembered a man who always wore a dark cap, even in summer, always alone. The case file thickened again. Detectives requested new warrants, re-interviewed witnesses. They compared security footage, examined years of case files for patterns, always looking for that single thread that would unravel the entire mystery. In the lab, the evidence was re-examined, photographs digitized and enhanced, Lydia's van reconstructed in virtual models. The process was relentless. Every new piece of information, a small fire in the cold dark of the unsolved. Word of the break in the case reached the Monroe family quietly, through a call from the lead detective. Karen Monroe listened in silence, her mind balancing between relief and the old, familiar ache. She felt hope, but also the cold knowledge that nothing, no arrest, no sentence, would bring Lydia home. Still, the possibility of truth was a kind of comfort. In February 2019, the Dallas Forensic Lab released a public statement. The old evidence had yielded new answers. The newspapers ran Lydia's photo again, grainier now, as if time itself had worn down her image. Old wounds reopened in the community. For some, it was only a headline, another case moving through the courts. For others, especially those who had quietly feared they might one day vanish too, it was a reminder that silence does not last forever. But in the world of investigation, there is no such thing as closure, only the next step. With the weight of science on their side, the detectives prepared for what came next. The arrest. For the Monroes, for the city, for every family still waiting. There was no undoing the lost years. But there was, finally, an answer the dark could not hide. When the name Harold Cochran surfaced, the case gained a new urgency. Dallas Homicide called in the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, hoping their experience with predators would unlock the meaning behind years of dead ends. They arrived with boxes of files and lists of questions, but what they really brought was a method, a way to read the patterns that ordinary eyes miss. Over days, the team moved quietly through the evidence, piecing together timelines, studying photos and witness statements from Dallas, Garland, and Texarkana. There was a cold precision in their work, a focus unsoftened by the years that had passed. They mapped each location: church parking lots, convenience stores, lonely stretches of Creekside Road. They tracked every police report that described a tall, dark-skinned man with a hat, every note that mentioned an abandoned car, every detail that had once seemed isolated but now appeared as threads in a much larger web. Slowly, a picture formed. Cochran did not strike at random. His life was a series of calculated choices, each one designed to minimize risk and maximize control. He learned the rhythms of his chosen neighborhoods: who went where, when, who was likely to be alone. He approached his victims under the pretense of needing help or directions. A stranger, yes, but not one to provoke immediate fear. He watched for women who hesitated, who paused out of kindness or uncertainty. It was not anger that drove him, but the need to dominate. He manipulated scenes, removed obvious clues, left vehicles staged to suggest accident or confusion. The knife in Lydia's van, left beneath the seat, was not a sign of panic, but a sign of method. Nothing was rushed. Even when the police found no clear signs of struggle, the behavioral unit saw the truth. The struggle had been psychological, control asserted in subtle gestures: a hand on the car door, a quiet threat, a forced silence. The more they examined, the more the investigators saw echoes of Lydia's case elsewhere. In Garland, 2010, a young woman attacked near a creek. Her car left running, purse untouched. In Texarkana, 2009, another victim's vehicle found abandoned, blood on the seat, no signs of robbery. Each crime scene was marked by water, by vehicles carefully positioned, by the absence of any clear evidence tying the perpetrator to the act. The details were not identical, but the signature was unmistakable: a calculated dance of approach, control, and disappearance. One profiler described Cochran's psychology as predatory, opportunistic, meticulous. He did not lash out in moments of rage. He waited, planned, circled his targets. The randomness was an illusion. Beneath it was a ritual, a pattern perfected over years. He did not seek chaos, but mastery, an ability to bend the world, for just a moment, to his will. For the Dallas police, the new connections reframed Lydia's story. She had not been an unfortunate exception, but the final link in a chain of attacks stretching back years. Cochran's earlier victims had not been forgotten, only misfiled, their cases separated by geography and time until science and method finally brought them together. The creek where Lydia's van was found became not just a scene of loss, but part of a dark geography, a place chosen not by chance, but by a mind that understood how to use the landscape as camouflage. Even as the behavioral analysis unit's report grew thicker, there was a sense of unfinished business. The pattern explained the past, but offered no guarantees for the future. Cochran was still at large, his life a mosaic of half-truths and hidden movements. But for the first time, police understood what they were facing: not just a suspect, but a man who built his life around control, who relied on silence and forgetfulness to shield him from justice. For Lydia's family, these findings were another layer of pain, proof that what had happened to her was not the result of random chance, but the end of a long, deliberate hunt. And yet, there was also clarity. The story, once a tangle of loose ends, was being retold in sharper detail. With it came the hope that the pattern could finally be broken, and that the silence which had swallowed Lydia Monroe might, at last, be lifted. By late spring of 2019, The investigation's net began to close around Harold Cochran. Years of uncertainty gave way to careful planning as detectives tracked his routines, staked out his battered apartment building in South Dallas, and quietly coordinated with federal agents. The surveillance reports described a man who moved through the world without hurry, who slipped in and out of rundown grocery stores, who rarely spoke to neighbors and trusted no one. Cochran's life was narrow. A string of odd jobs, anonymous motels, quiet bus rides across the city, always changing addresses when questions got too close. The arrest itself was methodical, calculated with the same precision that had come to define the case. On the morning of May 23rd, police converged on his apartment just after sunrise. No sirens, no shouting, just a practiced sequence of doors opening, footsteps on concrete, a few clipped commands. Cochran offered no resistance. He stood at the threshold in worn jeans and a faded sweatshirt, eyes unreadable, arms loose at his sides. His gaze flicked to the police, then down the hallway, as if already searching for a new escape. They found nothing spectacular in the apartment. A sagging mattress, stacks of mail, a duffel bag half-packed as if he was always ready to run. In the bottom drawer of his nightstand, they discovered a collection of small trinkets, cheap jewelry, a faded church program, and among them, a delicate silver bracelet engraved with the initials LM. The sight of the bracelet chilled the room. The detectives took it as evidence, bagged it with silent efficiency, knowing what it meant for the Monroe family waiting across the city. In the parking lot, they searched Cochran's old sedan. Under the floor mat in the back, they found a torn page from a Dallas street map, corners folded and roads traced with a thin line of ink, marking routes that crossed rivers, skirted city parks, disappeared into dead-end streets. The rest of the car was empty, stripped of anything personal, almost sterile, as if he had always known his world would one day be opened to the light. The interrogation began that afternoon, in a windowless room at police headquarters. Cochran sat across from the lead detective, hands cuffed loosely before him, the weight of 7 years' suspicion pressing down on his shoulders. For hours, he said nothing. The detective spoke quietly, describing the evidence, recounting the days and years, laying out the chain of proof that had led to this moment. The silver bracelet was placed gently on the table, a silent accusation glinting in the harsh fluorescent light. Cochran watched the detective's face, the corners of his mouth twitching once in something like a smirk. "There are thousands of girls in Dallas," he finally said, voice flat, almost bored. "You think you're that smart?" The words hung in the air, empty of remorse, heavy with the old confidence of a man who had evaded consequence for most of his life. He never admitted anything, never offered a detail, never explained. But the science had already spoken. DNA, pulled from a knife that had waited for years in a cardboard box, had placed him in Lydia Monroe's van on the night she vanished. Outside the interrogation room, the atmosphere was tense, burdened by the weight of years spent chasing a shadow. Detectives gathered in hushed groups, poring over statements and evidence, preparing for the press conference that would announce the break in the case. The city's journalists were summoned. Lydia's photo reappeared in news stories, no longer a symbol of loss, but now a banner for the possibility of justice. For the Monroe family, the call from the police was both a relief and a reopening of the old wound. Karen Monroe listened to the detective's careful words, her heart caught between gratitude and grief. She thought of the bracelet, of the way Lydia had worn it that last Sunday. of how something so small could survive so much darkness. For the first time in years, there was something tangible to mourn. A piece of Lydia's life returned, even if its meaning was forever altered. As the days passed, the legal machinery ground into motion. Cochran was formally charged, booked, his fingerprints and mugshot entered into the system. The story moved through the courts, each appearance another step in a long journey toward accountability. He continued to deny everything, never wavering, never faltering in his insistence that the police had the wrong man. But the evidence was patient, implacable. The DNA did not care about denial or silence or clever words. It simply existed, a truth that refused to be buried. Journalists dug into Cochran's past, uncovering details from old police files, interviewing neighbors who remembered him as a quiet loner, sometimes seen at night, sometimes gone for weeks. Other victims' families reached out to the Monroes, sharing the names of daughters and sisters lost to similar shadows. The city, for a brief moment, remembered not just Lydia, but all the girls who had vanished, all the stories that had nearly faded. In the end, it was not a confession that brought the story to its climax, but the accumulation of evidence and time. The bracelet, the knife, the DNA, a series of silent witnesses whose testimony could not be denied. Cochran sat in his cell, days marked only by the movement of sunlight through a barred window, as the world outside prepared for a trial that would finally speak Lydia Monroe's name in the language of justice. In the cold machinery of law, there are no dramatic endings, only the slow, inevitable press of truth against silence. And as the city waited, as the Monroes prepared for the long ordeal ahead, the question of what it meant to face the man who had stolen so much from them remained unanswered. But one thing was certain: denial, for all its stubbornness, could not hold back the truth forever. After Harold Cochran's arrest, investigators turned their attention back to the scene that had haunted them from the beginning: Dixon Branch Creek. Years had passed since they first pulled Lydia Monroe's white van from the shallow water, since they combed the brush for signs of a struggle and cataloged the few bloodstains as the only evidence of violence. The creek was a place where silence pooled, a stage set for endings, its secrets muffled by water and mud. But now, with a suspect in custody and a new perspective on the old evidence, the detectives returned. It was a late summer morning when the team gathered at the edge of the creek, sunlight streaking through overgrown trees, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. They walked the banks slowly, methodically, moving beyond the place where the van had been found, their eyes sharper, their questions changed by the years and by what they now knew about Harold Cochran's methods. 100 yards downstream, beneath the tangled roots of a sprawling tree, a detective noticed something odd. A patch of soil slightly raised, disturbed by age and weather, but not fully reclaimed. Kneeling, he brushed away leaves and loose earth until his hand struck plastic. Buried beneath the roots was a torn grocery bag, its edges eaten by time. Inside, folded tightly, was a blood-stained shirt. The faded tag, the size and brand, suggested it had belonged to a man. Dried blood clung to the fabric, dark and unmistakable. Forensics moved quickly. The shirt was sent to the lab, where tests confirmed what investigators suspected. The blood belonged to Lydia Monroe. But another test revealed something more. There was a second blood type, a genetic signature matching Harold Cochran. In the ritual of violence, he had left behind a piece of himself. Science, slow and relentless, finally spoke for the dead. The discovery of the shirt reframed the crime. With it, The detectives reconstructed what had likely happened on that quiet October evening. Cochran had intercepted Lydia in the Walgreens lot, forced her into the van, driven her through the city's winding streets to this secluded stretch of creek. There, beneath the cover of darkness and the low drone of passing cars, he staged the scene. A van tipped onto its side, personal belongings left untouched to suggest confusion or accident, all signs of a struggle concealed by water and mud. He tried to wash away the violence, to mask the crime as an inexplicable disappearance. But blood, and the ground itself, remembered. For Lydia's family, the new evidence was another wound, but also a kind of grim comfort. After years spent circling unanswered questions, there was at last a narrative, a grim but complete story to hold on to. Karen Monroe sat at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug gone cold, staring at the forensics report. In a strange way, knowing the details made the loss more real, the grief sharper, but it also granted a certain release from the endless questions: where, how, why. Investigators spent days at the creek, sifting through mud and debris, searching for anything else Cochran might have left behind. They found nothing more. No phone, no jewelry, no further evidence. But the bag and shirt, preserved for years by accident and chance, were enough. When the case went to court, these physical artifacts would become the silent testimony that Lydia herself could never give. The creek, for all its silence, had remembered everything. The investigators, hardened by years of cold cases, paused at the water's edge before leaving, aware that beneath the surface, every story leaves a trace. In the record of the investigation, the recovery of the shirt and its blood would be just another entry. Dates, times, scientific codes. But for those who searched, and those who grieved, it was the final answer the landscape itself had been holding close, waiting for someone to come back and ask the right question. August 2020 brought the Texas summer heat, and with it, the long-delayed trial of State of Texas versus Harold Cochran. It had been nearly 8 years since Lydia Monroe vanished on her way to church, her story etched into the city's memory and her family's bones. The courthouse on Commerce Street stood indifferent, a structure built to withstand storms, time, and the quiet suffering of those who entered its doors. On the morning of the trial, the Monroe family arrived early. Karen dressed in Lydia's favorite color, a soft blue, a quiet armor for the days ahead. Mark, stoic, his grief etched deep into the lines around his eyes, walked beside her. Emma, now a teenager, carried the memory of her sister as both shadow and light. They were joined by friends, church members, and, silently, by all those in Dallas who remembered what had been lost. Inside, the courtroom was packed, family on one side, reporters and curious strangers on the other, defense and prosecution separated by ritual and wood. At the front, Harold Cochran sat with his lawyers. Years of flight and denial had whittled him down to something smaller. His posture slouched, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the polished benches. There was no drama in his presence, no rage, no pleas, just the dull patience of a man who had learned to wait out consequence. Opening arguments set the tone. The prosecutor, measured, relentless, laid out the years of investigation, the breakthroughs in forensic science, the relentless work of a family and a city that refused to forget. Lydia's story was told again, her movements that Sunday traced minute by minute, her van's journey replayed, her belongings displayed on a table as if to prove she had indeed existed in the world. The jury listened, silent, some stealing glances at the family, whose pain filled every gap in the prosecutor's voice. The defense countered not with evidence, but with questions about memory, about possibility, about the fairness of science that could resurrect a name after so many years. They spoke of Cochrane's difficult life, hinted at intellectual disability, at confusion, at injustice. But even in the gentle cadence of the defense attorney, there was a sense of inevitability, like a river forced to run uphill. The testimony was slow, methodical. Detectives recounted their years of frustration, the early leads that turned to dust, the silent van in the creek. Forensic scientists explained touch DNA, how a cell too small to see could, given enough time and technology, unlock the truth. A technician from the Dallas lab described the moment Lydia's case file pinged a match, the unlikely miracle of science finally giving the lost girl a voice. The jury was shown the last living image of Lydia. Blurry Walgreens security footage, a young woman in a church dress, her silver bracelet flashing as she moved. The tape ran on a loop, the room caught between two worlds, one in which she still lived, and the cold present in which only her absence remained. Karen Monroe left the courtroom more than once, steadied by friends in the hallway, her grief made fresh by every pixel of evidence. Witness after witness described Cochrane's patterns, his movements, the string of attacks left scattered across Texas. The plastic bag, the shirt, the blood, each item presented not as a narrative, but as a series of facts. The silence in the courtroom punctuated only by the click of evidence being logged and the slow, careful questions of the lawyers. The defense made their case, arguing for mercy, for context, for doubt. They spoke of the gaps in the story, the impossibility of full certainty. But in the end, DNA did not waver, nor did the facts stitched together by years of pain and science. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The verdict was read aloud, guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent, as if even the air was waiting to see what would happen next. Cochrane stared straight ahead, unblinking, as if he had not heard at all. Karen Monroe closed her eyes, her shoulders trembling with the weight of words she had waited almost a decade to hear. Mark gripped her hand. Emma sobbed quietly, the sound of childhood finally released. Sentencing was swift. Life in prison, no parole. The case would not be appealed. There would be no more hearings, no more slow replays of Lydia's last day. For the Monroes, and for Dallas, justice was both an ending and a wound. Something healing, yes, but never complete. Standing before the court, Karen spoke, not for vengeance but for memory. She thanked the jury, the police, the scientists, the neighbors who never forgot. She spoke of Lydia's life, her laughter, the hole left behind. No sentence, she said, her voice steady, can bring my daughter back. I only pray her story will save someone else. As they left the courthouse, reporters called out questions. Karen did not answer. She walked into the sunlight with her family, carrying Lydia's memory forward. The long shadow of 8 years transformed, at last, by the cold, slow power of truth. The final chapter of Lydia Monroe's story is not found in court records or forensics reports, but in the silent aftermath. A city changed, a family remade by loss, and the shadow of a case that lingered long after the headlines faded. In the months after Harold Cochrane's conviction, life in Lakewood returned to something like normal. The porch lights still glowed on quiet streets. Children still rode bicycles past the Walgreens on Mockingbird Lane, and Sundays at Trinity Baptist resumed their gentle routines. But underneath the surface, the fabric of the neighborhood had changed. People looked a little longer at strangers, walked each other to their cars at dusk, and taught their children to never ignore that flicker of unease. For Karen Monroe, healing was slow, if it ever truly came at all. She continued her work at the Assault Survivors Center, her own story now woven into every conversation, every act of comfort she offered others. In the living room, Lydia's graduation photo remained on the mantel, her silver bracelet resting in a velvet box beside it. A private memorial. A reminder of the ordinary beauty of her daughter's life. Mark returned to work, quieter than before. Emma grew older, shaped by the empty place at the dinner table and by the example of a mother who turned grief into purpose. On the anniversary of Lydia's disappearance, a few families still gathered by the red box at Walgreens, candles flickering in the autumn air. Karen spoke softly, repeating the same promise. To remember, to remain vigilant, to never let Lydia's story become just another cold file in the archives. Others joined, holding photos of loved ones lost to violence, the circle of mourners growing, then shrinking again as the years passed. Lydia's case became part of local memory, a cautionary tale whispered at church youth meetings, a story retold to remind girls and their parents to trust their instincts, to be careful even in the most familiar places. The lessons from her life and death lingered, coloring the habits of a community that learned the hard way that safety is never guaranteed, that sometimes the unimaginable can unfold in the space of an ordinary Sunday. But beneath the grief and the warnings, something else persisted, a quiet resilience. The Monroe family found purpose in the pain, channeling their loss into advocacy, education, and support for others. Karen volunteered for state victims' rights groups, speaking at schools and community meetings, her voice measured but unwavering. Some wounds, she would say, can only be healed by the truth. In sharing Lydia's story, she kept her daughter's memory alive, not as a symbol of tragedy, but as a reminder that vigilance, compassion, and action are the only answers to violence and silence. The closing of the case echoed the real-life tragedy that inspired it. Lydia Monroe's story was drawn from the loss of Zoe Hastings, a bright young woman taken from Dallas in 2015. Her life and promise cut short in much the same way. Their stories converged not only in violence, but in the quiet courage of those left behind, families who refused to let grief be the final word. In the end, Lydia's absence became a legacy, her name carried forward in the lives she changed, the voices she inspired, and the simple acts of care that now echoed through her community. She was not just another missing person, not just a headline or a file number, but a thread woven through the hearts of all who refused to forget. The search for justice had found its answer, and in that answer, the possibility of healing remained.